Hi, I'm Jeremy Scott for the Howard County Library. In this video, we're going to be talking about shading techniques using pen and ink. Let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to show you is 4 ways that you can shade using pen and ink. The first one's called hatching, where you use lines and small dashes, all going in the same direction in order to create tonal value on your object or shape or form. One of the easiest ways to do this is to divide your shape in half and continue dividing it into smaller sections until your lines are nice and evenly spaced. This will help your shading appear deliberate, organized, and less chaotic. Another tip for creating accurate highlights, shadows, and middle tones is to lightly outline those areas in pencil before shading. This way you know where to begin transitioning your tonal values and creating your gradient. One of the best ways to create that gradient and that fade from dark to light is by starting with a solid line and then transitioning into a dotted line as you approach your highlight. Shading technique number 2 that we're going to be talking about is called cross-hatching. With cross-hatching, we're going to be using intersecting lines to create shading and tonal values. Cross-hatching is great for achieving very dark tones rather quickly. So with cross-hatching, we're going to start the same way we did with hatching, by outlining our shadows, highlights, and middle tones using pencil first. Then we're going to start evenly spacing our lines both vertically and horizontally to start enhancing our tonal values. For me, I try to hatch as long as possible, and I always try and thread the lines without them touching, and as soon as they start to touch, or right before they do, that's when I'll go ahead and switch over to cross hatching. This way I can really pinpoint where I want the tonal values to be deeper and my shadows to increase. One of the things that you'll also notice with all the pen and ink shading techniques is the use of dotted lines. I think that by using dotted lines, it avoids you over committing to a certain tonal value, and it really gives you the opportunity to always step up that shadow or leave it as it is, and it's a nice jumping off point for your transitions. For our next shading technique, we're going to be using cross-contour lines. Cross-contour lines are lines that follow the form of the subject and are used to create the illusion of dimension. And one of the best ways to think about this is to imagine the latitude and longitude lines on a globe, or think of a topographical map. And since we've already gone ahead and identified where our highlights and shadows are going to be using pencil, now we're going to start to take our cross contour lines and wrap them around the form. And just like with the previous examples, we want to go ahead and make sure they're evenly spaced. And this will be our first pass of tonal values. Another thing to notice is how all those cross contour lines, at the beginning, they all go in the same direction. And it's not until it's time to step up the shadow do we go ahead and start to intersect them. So keep that in mind, and it'll make it a lot more organized and easier to identify what areas need to be enhanced. The final shading technique that we're going to cover today is called stippling. With stippling, we use dots to create tonal value. So by clustering dots closer together, we can increase our tonal value and create deeper shadows. With stippling, the first thing you want to do is try and create a field of dots across your whole form. And you want the dots to be evenly spaced, with each row offsetting the next row like you're laying bricks. This way, our dots feel organized, yet they don't feel like they can be aligned into columns or rows. From here, we want to go ahead and try and have our dots still be evenly spaced, even though we're starting to cluster them a little closer together. It's not until we absolutely have to do we want our dots to start overlapping as we're creating that tonal value. So hold off on overlapping those dots as long as you possibly can. Instead of focusing and only shading in one area and then trying to paint yourself out of a corner, try to work all over your form. That way you're bringing the whole piece up together rather than section by section. Also, remember that stippling is one of the slowest shading techniques out there, and that you really shouldn't be hoping to, speed through something. If you take your time, I guarantee you it'll come out looking great. And just be prepared to spend hours creating those dots. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and apply all those shading techniques that we just learned. We're going to start with hatching. First thing that we're going to do is outline and separate our highlights and shadows so that we know where to start creating our transitions. We're going to outline our form. You don't have to do this first, but for the sake of the tutorial, I think it helps to have a good idea of what we're trying to shade. So from here, we're going to go ahead and try and separate our form evenly with those initial lines to get us a nice field of tonal values to jump off with. And then we're going to go ahead and try and increase the tonal value by threading those lines. Notice how we're starting off with a lot of dotted lines. Not every line is a solid one. And I'm trying to create those solid lines in the areas where I've already identified are in deeper shadow. And just so you guys know, I'm trying to use the same light source as the object above what I'm drawing. So I'm trying to make it look like the light is coming from the same direction. Okay, so for our next example, we're going to be doing cross hatching, and we're going to be shading this straight blade, this straight razor. Notice how we're going to try and work in one direction, either vertically or horizontally, but we want to work in one direction with our lines and then change directions when we feel it's time to increase that tonal value and step up that shadow. As we work through the shading examples, try to take notice of the use of dotted lines, and also try to check to see how the dotted lines are offsetting each other and they're not lined up right behind the next one. Alright, so with our cross contour lines, we want to make sure that our lines are not just following the form, but we want our lines to really enhance the dimension of the object, okay? And we want our lines to give the viewer more information about what they're looking at.